All right. So you talked earlier about, falling in love with an idea. Well, let's talk the Bachelorette. And I was going to share just a preface. Zach and I when did we first meet? Like 7 years ago?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Or about.
Yep.
Right. So we share some professional, kind of certification and interests around continuous improvement methodologies. And, there in the DFW area, there was this opportunity to meet, networking, compare notes. And, we're sitting there having breakfast, I think it was, and kind of sharing, my background, and Zach's going through his career. And so then casually throws out like, then I was on the Bachelorette. And then just kind of slip that in there, which I said, I know I get a sense of the show, but I didn't recognize you from the show. When I came home and mentioned you to my wife and to her mother, they were like, "Oh, Zach, we love Zach." So that was my introduction to you back then, at least.
It's funny. The audience of that show, you never know who's watching. And I remember at the height of viewership when I was coming off I was still working in oil and gas, and I would be down in South Texas at a small town at a gas station, and guy coming in boots and a cowboy hat. "Hey, aren't you that guy from The Bachelor?" And I'm like, well, it's crazy the reach that show has. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will admit to being drawn. I think especially pandemic times, I got drawn into a couple of seasons where I was watching probably as actively as Amy, but she's still with it and watching the new seasons. But I'm curious to hear, like, the decision process of applying to be on a show like this and wondering, is this a good idea? Is this a mistake? Or did you think, no, how much did you try to evaluate that, or did you kind of just dive into it?
Yeah, it's a very similar situation to starting the startup, in the fact that the alignment was right. And in the case of the startup, the company I was working for was failing. We all knew we were going to be cut. And this time, I was living in San Antonio, working in oil and gas. I was having a really hard time meeting people. And I didn't have a lot to lose. Mm-hmm. My sister would say, you should try out for the show. I tried out, didn't think much about it. But when I got on, the risk was you're gone for a couple months, you travel the world, you get to hang out with other cool guys on the show, some not so cool. And what do you have to lose? You may meet someone exceptional, but what you have to lose is the possibility. At the time, I was a consultant in oil and gas, so I was able to kind of move from a project and then come back hoping to find another.
Yeah,
so I didn't have a lot to risk at the time.
Mm-hmm. And then, as my wife had pointed out, as she knew, Zach's sister Carly. Now, she had been a contestant on one of the women on a season of The Bachelor before you, right?
So actually after,
sorry.
No, it's okay. During my show, she had, the film crew had come to meet my family because the Bachelorette was coming to my house, and they met my sister and they said, "Oh, you should come on the show. You'd be really great." But the Bachelor for her season was going to be somebody from mine, right? Mm-hmm. Usually it's somebody within that pool. And we already had a good idea of who it was going to be. And it was somebody that she wasn't too fond of. So she actually delayed her being a contestant on the show for another year and, roll the dice. And it worked out. But she ended up being on 2 additional spinoffs of the show.
Yeah.
And got married from it.
Yes. Now, and my wife's going to cringe when she hears me make the mistake of who was on first. So my mistake. So it goes. But was she able to benefit from your experience at all, or did she do her thing her way?
Well, the funny thing in terms of benefiting from the show that didn't exist when I was on was the prevalence of social media and influencer culture. It was just starting to kind of take root. Yeah. But by the time my sister was on it 2 years later, the people that made it, in the top 5 or so from the show, got a good audience base, could essentially make a living from, as we know what influencers are now. Yeah. And she really continues to do that even to this day.
Mm-hmm. And what year was it that you were on?
Let's see, 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that was not one of the very first seasons. I mean, it had already been established and been around for a while
that's right.
at that point. I mean, I'm curious for you, or if you had a sense from others, like, how much do you go and study previous seasons and try to figure out what to do, or is that maybe a waste of time?
Yeah.
You need to just come be yourself and do your own thing.
Yeah, it's for me. I knew I would lose motivation if I watched the whole season,
Yeah.
so I purposely didn't, and went on having everything be fresh and new.
Yeah. Did you get a sense from the other guys you were competing with on that season? I mean, I imagine some of them, I'm sure there's different approaches. Some probably broke it down like game film and seriously studied it. And some were like, hey, wait, oh, there's cameras. What? Yeah.
Yeah. I think those who studied, it was detrimental. I mean, you tried to like employ certain strategies that you'd seen 4 seasons ago, and others had kind of picked up on those strategies being reemployed, and it just, and the show would essentially foreground anything that was similar, right? And they would spotlight it in a way that you knew was going to cause drama.
Yeah.
My whole strategy was essentially just sit back and don't get involved in any of the drama, and that worked out well.
So you were trying to head off that you predicted that would have been a mistake.
Predicted it would have been a mistake. Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, it's such a fascinating dynamic to try to think like what. It's one thing to watch the show, then it's another thing to step back and try to put yourself in the shoes, of somebody who was going through that. Now, first off, though, I mean, I think there's a general business or career lesson there of kind of like, don't try too hard to copy what some other company did. At some point, you've got to be yourself and do your own thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. The interesting thing about the experience was, like, there's a person that's put up on a pedestal that you don't know a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the hope, at least, that there's somebody exceptional because they were put on that platform.
Right.
And then it's all about finding out if they are.
Mm-hmm.
And you get very limited data, right? 1 week, you spend 5 or 10 minutes. As the show goes on, you get to spend a little more time, but it's never more than a couple hours in a week. And that's really all the data you have to go from.
Wow.
Yeah. Your hope is that you get to the end and now you have exclusive time to figure it out, right? But in order to get that exclusive time, you have to really wait it out.
Yeah. Because I mean, everyone's sort of taking a flyer of what path is going to happen. I'm sure there's different things that happen where somebody, one of the other guys right away. What was the Bachelorette's name for your season? Desiree. That some guys might come in and whatever and just right away think, okay, well, no, there's something about Desiree just not attractive to me. It doesn't seem like a fit. They might think that right away, and then they're okay. Well, maybe they're just destined to have a short stint. They get sent home in the first group, and maybe that's for the best. And then there's probably others who at the other extreme, or at the other side of the spectrum, are like, oh, she's amazing, and you have attraction feelings and you're trying to pursue that. And then, there might be there's that middle ground where it seems like there's people on each season who just want to be on TV.
Yeah.
And there's this question or this conflict of they might not be into her, but they want to stay around. That's kind of what are your thoughts on just that dynamic, and from what you experienced or as you see perhaps other seasons of this?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, one, it's even more prevalent now because people can monetize their time on TV.
Sure.
So that adds a whole nother layer. But in my time, it wasn't as prevalent. But you have those people that really maybe are between jobs, maybe don't have a lot going for them in a career. And this is just like time to hang out. Mm-hmm. It's not even about being on TV. It's just like, sure. I have nothing else to do, right? And that, it adds a complexity to it because those individuals, from my experience, tended to kind of cause drama. And yeah.
Well, and it seems like, I mean, the different types of mistakes. You mentioned people trying to, follow someone else's game plan. It's here. I'm going to ask you this because I've seen enough of the show to know like this never seems to pan out well. Like you can see a mistake coming where, let's say, I'll frame it in terms of a Bachelorette season where one of the guys is really behaving badly, being rude to everybody else, even being disparaging towards the Bachelorette. So this is bad. But then one of the other contestants decides, well, I need to go tell the Bachelorette what's going on. And that just always seems to backfire.
Exactly. And, even let's say, person A has gone and told the Bachelorette, right? You have a conversation with her in 2 hours and you don't really want to bring it up either. She's heard it from everyone else. It's been the topic of conversation. She understands that part of the allure of the show is this drama, like sub thread, and that it has to happen. But yeah, you feel through sometimes the stimulation of the production crew, they'll throw in a question, right? And then all of a sudden you find yourself talking about it, even though you didn't want to. So there is that artificial aspect of it, right? That certainly, yeah. And even comes so more in the editing.
Well, so I was going to ask about those two. There's maybe three pieces there of the artificial nature of who the producers are selecting. And you can always tell there's certain types of like, oh, there's the troublemaker. They know that person's a train wreck, or there's that. And then there's what the producers might try to instigate, and then the way that it's edited. Like, how do you think those three pieces contribute to this quote unquote reality television maybe not being really that real?
Yeah, no, that's certainly their magic formula, right? And like you said, there's these certain archetypes that will always be built into the casting. There is this element of asking, interceding in situations to create the drama, and even more so kind of wearing you down into saying something, right? Because every day you're called in for probably an hour-long one-on-one interview with the producer, sometimes twice or three times a day. Really? And their whole goal is to get snippets, little sound bites they can use. I took the approach of like just not giving into it and just glossing over, controlling my own narrative, essentially, right? Others don't. Like they'll have too much to drink, or they'll just be weak-minded enough to just let everything spew out. And then the editing part is the element you really have no control over. You can be made to be a hero or a villain.
So I guess going through that, at some point you say, well, I'm going to do my best. I can only control how I act, how they're going to portray it. I guess that's part of the risk of coming on a show like that.
That's right. Yeah. You can only control so much. That's for sure.
Yeah. If somebody came to you and said, hey, Zach, I'm thinking about going on this. Do you have blanket advice of either run away or, hey, go, if you want, go and do it? Like, what advice might you give to someone because the show's still going on, they still want people to apply?
Yeah. To me, it's completely a risk reward thing. If you have a lot going in your career, with friend groups and all these things that you're happy and content with, then take the long path in trying to meet someone special. If you don't have a lot going on, and maybe there is this element that because you have some exposure, that you do have a chance of meeting someone after the show, which is an element that I think a lot of people consider. But to me, it completely comes down to career. If you've got something going for you, if you're going to take 3 months off, the job's probably not going to be the same when you come back. You're going to be pushed out in some capacity. So don't take that risk if you have something going for you.
Yeah. Because what was the time frame again? If someone gets sent home right away, that's how much time between arriving and departing, like real lifetime, not TV time.
That's right. Yeah. I think the shortest you can be gone is probably a week. If you get sent home on that very first rose ceremony night, you spent about 3 or 4 days in a hotel with the pre-production stuff. Then you'd probably have a day after of production, and then you'd be sent home. But in the most extreme example, you'd be gone 3 months.
Okay.
If you go final.
That whole 3 months. Yeah. And then, you finished fourth place in that season. You made it pretty far to the end. For people who don't know you and your story, if you wouldn't mind sort of just walking through a little bit about how The Bachelor ended and then meeting your now wife that you have a family with.
Yeah, good question. It was interesting. I was probably strung along with other contestants, but in terms of ending, I don't think you ever see it coming that when you get to those later stages that you're going to be kicked off. And when I was kind of shocked. I didn't think I would make it to the end, but I thought at least I would get one step further. You're looking at you're like, that guy made it? It's one of those things.
I'm not going to ask you which guy you're referring to. Maybe some other time.
That was the only shocking part. In terms of your on-camera reaction, there is, I think, a sense of responsibility you feel at that point, no matter how you feel, to show it up a little more than maybe what's inside. And I'm sure everybody feels this, but I think part of it's out of duty and respect for the Bachelorette in some way. Like you don't want to, come across as, oh, this, okay, fine, I'm going home, right? And it's a little bit disrespectful for the real or simulated relationship that you've been a part of, right? So there's that. Coming home, you're in this weird about 2-month period between leaving the show and the show airing. And they scare you with all these clauses. Hey, you've signed here. If you talk about the results, you're going to get sued for whatever, 2 million or 3 million or something.
Right.
And to make that even more complicated, at the time I was being told, hey, you're the favorite to become the next Bachelor, right? I'm sure other people told us the same thing.
Okay.
So, you better be good. You better sit by your phone because we may be calling you at any time. Luckily I had a good friend from the show that him and I spent a lot of time with, and he was being told the same thing. He ended up becoming the Bachelor. But I ended up meeting my wife, Elizabeth, during that period where I was, and when I met her, I was like, okay, like, even if I got the call, I don't know if I would take it.
Right.
So it was a pretty easy decision when I met her. I mean, I was obviously really interested in meeting someone special, and then meeting her, it was a no-brainer. The timing was right, and we jumped into it.
Now, I mean, it's one thing for Desiree and who I'd say, sorry, I don't know the names. I should have done some research here.
No, Chris. Yeah, Chris.
Chatting about this, Chris, Desiree, and Chris. It's one thing that if they're still together, they have to try to keep that under wraps or quiet or no. But like for you, I don't know. Was there any, did you think like, well, someone's going to see you out with Elizabeth and take pictures and say, okay, well, no, Zach didn't win.
Yeah. At that point, I kind of didn't care.
Okay. Sure.
It was like, I would be held responsible for things I said, not as much being in a picture with someone.
Okay.
So I was fine like having that happen. And then, it's funny, all that being said, when everything was revealed, we would go on couples trips with Desiree and Chris and my wife and I think even before we were married. And the interesting thing was like the friendships were there between all of us, right? But you could tell the romantic connections weren't as much as we were making them out to be at the time. So it was interesting to see how that all kind of settles in that period.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's things work out for different people in different ways and different paths. And, so it's interesting to see. And sadly, I don't know the exact percentages, but it seems like, especially in earlier seasons of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, the percentage of couples that actually went through with getting married was very low. Like Ryan and Krista from a season. And then it seems like there's been more of that recently. I don't know if that's something the producers, because they seem to really want to bank on, well, this isn't just a game show. People are getting engaged and married, and having happy lives together. It seems like that's happening more. I don't know if that's by design or if there's other factors. I wonder.
Yeah, I think it's by design, and the fact that they will create this fairy tale Hollywood TV wedding for you if yeah. So you get all that comes along with that, and that will be, foregrounded for TV, and then the divorces that happen afterwards kind of fall by the wayside, right? Which are just as prevalent. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess one other question I was going to ask just about some of those dynamics. You mentioned going on trips with other couples. Do you feel like there's sort of like a fraternity / sorority of people who've been on the show? And I guess there's probably a very different, well, maybe it is very much like a fraternity and a sorority, that guys like you who are contestants on the Bachelorette season, in a way you have a lot in common with the women who are competing for the Bachelor. But is there sort of a community or in a formal way, or you've got some people that you've met and you're friends with?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for the time right after the show, why people are still single, like they all benefit from kind of banding together, and being a part of that community, that fraternity publicly to attract, right, for long-term relationships or short-term relationships. But there's certainly that benefit to it. But I've noticed that as people like myself get married and settled into family life, those fraternities start to kind of break apart in a way that,
Well, there we go. Different stages of life, and sometimes you don't get to keep in close contact with your college buddies, whether it was fraternity or otherwise. So,
right. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating to talk about these different aspects of entrepreneurship and Bachelorette. Just kind of thinking of taking risks, heading off, evaluating risk, heading off mistakes, bouncing back from mistakes. There's a lot of we're drawing connections there. I don't know, I'm going to put you on the spot. Like if someone were to say, "Hey, Zach, we want you to write a business book about entrepreneurship lessons from The Bachelor or The Bachelorette," is there anything that comes to mind? We could always brainstorm on a title later. I'm totally putting you on the spot, but anything that comes to mind there. If someone were to say, "Hey, we're going to dangle this book contract in front of you," what would you say?
I would say, don't read my book. Write your own book in real-time conversation with others. I think, to me, more and more, I'm realizing that's where the real knowledge is. It's just being engaged in the process of knowledge creation in real time, as the world is changing. Don't be afraid to say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, but be in conversation and community with others where it's okay to fail.
That's very well said. I think that's a great note to end on there, Zach. Well done. So thank you for coming on and suffering through my semi-informed questions about the show. And thanks for sharing your favorite mistake story, and more importantly, lessons learned, and being open about that. I really appreciate it.
Of course, always great to talk to you. Enjoy this.
Okay, likewise. Thanks, Zach.
Uh-huh.